Hello and welcome to the Gooner. Back again with you guys for another show, for another episode of our tactical breakdown series, our show in which we look at the players that have been linked to Arsenal and look at them in an analytical and statistical way with the help of some experts and journalists from around the world to give you guys the most in-depth and comprehensive view of who these players are, so you can be the most educated as feasibly possible surrounding them. And for today's show, we're going to be looking at a French Lyon striker. I mean, is it deja vu? I feel like I'm back in 2015 all over again. But no, this is what we're going to be looking at today. And to replace an ex-French Lyon striker, maybe, we're going to get the thoughts and feelings of our French correspondent Jeremy Smith around Moussa Dembele, and get your thoughts and feelings as well as we compare him to some of Arsenal's current squad and another striker that Arsenal have been linked to, which I think a lot of people would rather probably see at Arsenal. There's been some conflicting reports around this guy, but of course, the design of the show is not to link him necessarily. It is to tell you guys who he is, what he's about, and what he could bring to Arsenal as well. So this is how the video is going to go down. We're going to get the expert insight from Jeremy first. We're then going to go into some statistical comparisons between him, between Lacazette, Aubameyang, and Odsonne Edouard as well. And finally end off the show by getting your guys' reaction in the chat box. So without further ado, let's go on with the first part of the show, which is our expert insight from Jeremy Smith, who you can find on Twitter at JeremySmith98. Let's crack on with it.
Arsenal have been linked with French striker Moussa Dembele, who he's only 24, which seems a bit surprising because he's kind of been on everyone's radar for quite a long time now. But it feels like he's at quite an important point in his career. You look at his stats, and throughout his career, he's scored more or less a goal every 2 games, which is a really good record for a striker. And yet he's sort of fallen off the radar in the last year or so, and no one seems to fancy him that much, which is a bit strange. You look at his recent time at Lyon, his first 2 seasons, he was pretty much again scoring a goal every 2 games. I think the first season he was just under, the next season he was over, and then sort of not went to everyone's attention, but he came off the bench to score those 2 goals to help Lyon to beat Man City in the sort of final 8 Champions League mini tournament thing last year. And you kind of thought, well, he's at his peak now. He's kind of just on the outskirts of the full French team after being a record goal scorer for the France under-21s. Everything looks good. And then this season, everything's just sort of collapsed around him. At Lyon, Garcia clearly didn't really fancy him as a starter, so he made almost all his appearances the first half of the season as a sub and went something like 12 games without scoring. He only scored 1 goal, I think, this season, and that was like the 3rd goal in a 3-0 win, so it wasn't exactly important anyway. Then he had injuries. I think he broke his arm, and then he went on loan to Atletico, and partly because obviously they're having a good season despite having a few striker issues when Suarez is out injured. Then he had COVID as well. So he's really not had a decent chance to force his way into the Atletico team either. So I don't think that loan has gone very well. And it's hard to know where he is now. I think the problem is he really is sort of the archetypal fox in a box. If he'd been around at the time of Wenger when Jeffers was meant to be that player, and Wenger was desperately looking for that kind of striker, he'd have been ideal. He is a very good finisher. He's good in the air. He's strong. He knows where the goal is most of the time. But the problem, in a way, is that is pretty much all he does. He's only really effective in the box. And certainly, I think the reason that he sort of fell out of favour at Lyon is because Garcia prefers to have some kind of combination of like Depay and Cadawera and Toko Ekambi, who are all sort of mobile, can all play off the flanks as well and sort of interchange. I think Dembele is sort of relatively limiting in that he is a number 9 who is going to stay down the centre, sniffing around the goal, which is great if that's the kind of striker you want, but not so much if you want a bit more sort of fluidity up front. And the other problem with that, obviously, is that he's not doing anything else except contributing goals, which is great if he's scoring them, but if he goes on a long run of bad form like he did at the start of this year, then he's not contributing anything else really to the team. That's kind of the issue, and that's where I think Dembele is. So if Arteta's looking for an out-and-out striker, an out-and-out goal scorer, and he's able to get Dembele back to his top form and his confidence, then especially considering he's had a bad year and the financial situation of lots of clubs, there could be a really good deal to be made there. But because of where Dembele is at the moment, it's probably fair to say that it's quite a big risk, because we just don't know if he's ever going to be able to come back to his previous good form, and to what extent there's room for improvement there. Because obviously with due respect to Fulham and then Celtic and then even Lyon to an extent, becoming a regular goal scorer in the Premier League is maybe the next step up, and so there's a relative amount of risk in bringing him in and saying, are you the man to do those things? He has progressed throughout his career and taken each stage and each step up well. It's just this last year or so that's been the first real challenge of his, and it'll be interesting to see if he is able to come out of it, and whether Arsenal is the club for him to do that.
So, thank you, Jeremy. It's a lot to kind of compact and break down. As I said, if you want to go follow Jeremy on Twitter, you can at Jeremy Smith 98. He's fantastic for French football, hence why we always get him on the show. The thing about Dembele is that when I first saw the link, and you probably saw from my Twitter feed, that I was very much of the mind of going, no thanks, no. Don't want him, was my initial reaction. And basically I was trying to put this into perspective of going, I don't think he's any better than Lacazette. I don't think he's, why would we get rid of Lacazette and bring in Dembele, other than the fact of his age? And of course, he might be able to be got for a good deal, and he's got the potential to get better. But right now, I don't really know if he's got the potential. I see a couple of people in the chat saying that he's comparative to Nketiah. I think that is very harsh. I don't think that's the case at all. This is someone that at Celtic was performing really, really well. They performed well as a kid at Fulham as well, and had performed well at Lyon initially as well. So to call him an equivalent of Eddie Nketiah, I don't think that's a fair comparison at all, and a very, very hyperbolic, not a little bit hyperbolic. It is a massive exaggeration. He's had a difficult year and a bit. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about some of his stats. Now, in a minute, let's move on to those. In fact, right now, let's do the comparison. So we are going to compare him to Odsonne Edouards. We're going to compare him to Lacazette, and we're going to compare him to Aubameyang. These statistics are league stats. Now, I have not taken into account the Atletico statistics. Some people might say, why wouldn't you? The reason why I've not taken them into account is for a number of reasons. One is because he's got 4-ish sub-appearances, so there's not much to kind of extrapolate from that. The other is that he's had some serious health issues, and he's obviously been hit by the pandemic too. So I've not used those. What I have done is that we're going to look at his league stats in Liga from this season, and even then it's a lot of kind of sub-appearances. And we're going to look at his league stats from last season in comparison to the current season of these three players. So let's crack on with that comparison. Start off with the heat maps and seeing where they kind of play on the pitch. Now, initially you see that the heat maps for Dembele are not exactly very intense, because he's not playing too much for starters. But when he does play, the white, by the way, the white image is this current season. The orange is the previous season. And he does like to pop up in the box, obviously, but he does kind of shift to that left-hand side as more of a favoured position. He's someone who likes to cut in and shoot on that right foot if you can. And that is going to come from doing that on the left-hand side. So that's certainly part of his game. You look at the others in comparison, Edouard's much more intense. Again, still slightly skewed to the left. Aubameyang's much, much more to the left, because, of course, he has played a lot on the left wing. And Lacazette is much more in the middle and comes a lot deeper than what we see from others. What's also quite embarrassing for Lacazette's statistics is that there's a very intense patch of heat at the centre circle for obvious reasons. But moving on from that embarrassment, goals per 90 this season, it's obviously not been great for Dembele at all. 0.12. He scored 1 goal in the few appearances for Lyon that he's been given. Basically, Lyon are in a situation where Jeremy summed up what they got: Depay and Toko Akambi, Kadewere, and he's not going to be getting in at the moment, and that's why he's not been playing and scoring. But when he was playing, he was doing quite well last season. 16 goals, 0.61 goals per game, which is better than both Laka and Aubameyang from this year. Not as good as Edouard's. And what you have to think about the context surrounding Edouard, it's very difficult to do a straight comparison between players, especially from different leagues and teams and stuff. Edouard's obviously playing at Celtic, and although they've not had the best of seasons, Celtic do tend to dominate a lot of the games that they play, and although that's not technically been the case as much, I should say, this season. So that's something to consider. Looking at the offensive duels, so this is when a player obviously is battling on the ball, usually in possession and kind of coming away with it or not. When you're in possession of the ball, this is when you go into these duels. And I mean, even then, it's not great viewing for Dembele. 26.3% of those offensive duels are being won, which is considerably lower than Aubameyang, lower than Lacazette, and lower than Edouard's as well. Not great viewing there. And even last season, it was actually, even though he was getting involved in more offensive duels, he was winning 0.2% less than he is this season. So that's certainly not a positive either. His XG last season was quite good, 0.41, but it's quite good. It's not. That's probably even less than that, to be honest. So when you look at how poor Aubameyang's been this season, and then we talk about Dembele last season, they were on a kind of a par, and he's dropped more since then. Whereas Edouard's XG, 0.82, is very good for a whole season. Still playing at Celtic, of course. That's something to factor in, but certainly one that you'd say that he's on form, he'd be the one to go for right now. Shooting positions where they are on the pitch. Looking at the 2 previous seasons for Dembele specifically, obviously he's taken a lot less shots this season because he hasn't been on the pitch as much. But when he is taking them, he does like to take them in the box. A lot of his goals have come from just outside the 6-yard box, which is a good statistic to have. It means that you're not necessarily just a poacher and that you can create goals for yourself in and around that area. But this season, he hasn't been able to get in those right positions whatsoever so far, and that's been a real big problem for him. If you compare that to someone like Edouard, where his shots are all over kind of the box, there's not necessarily a clear skew, ever so slightly maybe towards the left, but he's shooting from all different positions in the box. He's getting goals from all different positions in the box, and that is a very impressive shot map that you can see. Lacazette's is also impressive, not in terms of his frequency, just from where he's scoring from. He's getting some really decent shots in from inside the 6-yard box, pick it up in the right place at the right time, and from outside the 6-yard box as well. No goals from outside the box as yet, whereas Edouard does have a couple. Aubameyang, though, all of his goals tend to be skewed to the left-hand side of the box because that's where he's been playing a lot of his games and where he likes to cut inside and find himself to take those shots. Aerial duels, in terms of how they are in the air, this is where Edouard and Dembele do come out more on top than the others. I mean, for Dembele, 41.5% is a good return for aerial duels being won, dropped ever so slightly, and he's getting involved in a lot more aerial duels than the other players in this list. Edouard's 40.7% is also strong, but Lacazette and Aubameyang's are much, much lower in terms of their success rate. And that is something that we've struggled with this season, is getting balls into the box, but not really to anyone in particular that can do much with them. This aerial duels is not, of course, across the entire pitch defensively and offensively, but the fact that we know that these two can't win these aerial duels as much as the other two that aren't currently at the club is a concern, that we haven't got a player that is a little bit more different to what we've seen from our current crop of strikers. Passing, to finally round off these stats, we've got, I mean, strikers, it's always difficult to kind of analyse passing statistics because they're not creators. They do obviously want to try and get in with a couple of assists maybe throughout the season, but in terms of their actual passing, Dembele's is the least accurate of the group as well, even though he's passing less than them as well. And that's across the last 2 seasons. Edouard has the most accurate passing and the most frequent passing too of all the players on the list. And so it's very difficult to kind of come up with an argument to support the idea of going for Dembele, and that's why I very much fall on the side of things to say that no, this isn't the right guy. This is not who Arsenal should be going for. And Edouard makes more sense, although his stats are a bit padded from playing in Scotland. He still has the form, the age, the kind of consistency that Arsenal have needed, the different kind of variation in a striker that we've needed as well. And he's still got the pace. He's not exactly slow for a forward-thinking player. But specifically going back to Dembele, it's just if this is the ambition, if this is what Arsenal are going for this summer, I'm not excited. I'm really, really not. And that would really concern me if that was really where Arsenal were going for. Hopefully there's reports that will come out soon that really kind of say that this has been overblown. This isn't really anything. But there was quite a few that were suggesting that this is the case. So I really don't know. I hope it's not true. And if it is true, I wish them all the best, but it's going to be a real struggle. And again, another sign I feel that Arsenal are just not moving in the right direction in regards to their transfers. Let's go through some of your thoughts and feelings to round off today's video. Get your thoughts and feelings about Moussa Dembele and how you think Arsenal should be looking at their striking department. Irving says, yeah, Edouard is also my choice. Mike Hendry says, I'm a Celtic supporter and I've watched both, and Dembele is the far better striker. Maybe, Mike, during those times when Dembele was at Celtic, you've rated him higher. But since moving on to leagues which are more competitive, he has fallen off. His speed, not his speed necessarily, but just his output in games has fallen off. And he's not been able to transition as well as maybe Edouard could. So maybe whilst Dembele was the more successful striker at Celtic, he ultimately has not been the guy that's transitioned, whereas Edouard may be able to do that much better. But thank you for the input, much appreciated. Joel says, what sort of fee would Arsenal have to pay for Dembele or Edouard? Weirdly, I think they'd be a very similar figure, between 25 and 30. I think you'd be looking at the moment. So another reason that it makes even less sense to go down this route. I really don't know why Arsenal would. It just, doesn't make sense to me in that sense. Yo-Yo says the stats suggest that this is an unlikely buy. Broken says, hearing that Edouard is available for the cheap as well, about £15 million to get him to Arsenal would be crazy not to go for him. James says, if Brentford get promoted, then the price for Tony will double. I'm not a fan of Tony, to be honest. I really am not. I don't think he's the player that Arsenal should go for at all. I just not been a fan of what I've seen of him personally. I don't think he would fit Arsenal's kind of rhetoric right now. Jordan says Edouard is a Benzema type striker. Benzema is a very kind of he's a bit of an enabler and has been. He helps the players around him a lot. I'm not sure if it translates completely the same. That might be a bit of a broad comparison to make, but I think there's quite a few more differences than you're making out. Yo says, is there a statistic for how regularly you are fouled and where? Not that I've got access to, unfortunately. Otherwise, I definitely would include something like that. But no, I haven't got any access to those sort of stats for Fry Scout. Matt G says, Tom, are you okay not wearing a black t-shirt? Yes, I don't always have to. I don't have to wear black every time. I just seem to have a lot of black t-shirts. It's just how it is. Utah says the main problem with Dembele is that he's nowhere near better than Lacazette. We need a better player if we're not going to keep him. This is the way that I've been talking, is that if we are going to if we're going to try and upgrade this team, then you need to look at the players that are ultimately going to have the best effect. And Dembele is just not going to be that guy for Arsenal, unfortunately. Balaji says, hey, Tom, how would Dembele look statistically against the likes of Pats and Daka? We will obviously look to do a statistical comparison with the likes of Pats and Daka if we get linked to a little bit more. But for now, we are not going to be going down that route. Jordan says, what's your thoughts on Thuram, the Borussia Mönchengladbach forward, also France international? I just don't think he's in the kind of the age profile that we should be looking for in terms of players right now. And I don't think that he's got the output necessary, really, that I should be looking at. That's unless I'm thinking of someone else. Give me a second, because I just want to go on to Thuram's. I don't want to say something about a player that isn't necessarily true. But I'm pretty sure. Sorry, I was thinking of Alessandro Playa, the other French for Gladbach. He is the age bracket we should look at, but he would come at a very steep price. And would he block kind of the routes of other players in the team? Is he a player that we should really be investing that amount of money in when we need centre midfielders, when we need right backs? I don't know is the answer. It could be a really good option for us, but it's difficult to kind of say. Yeah, apologies. I was getting confused with player at Gladbach. There you go. Iron Cub says, thoughts on Vlahovic. I genuinely don't know much about Vlahovic of Fiorentina. I'm not a big watcher of Serie A. I'm aware that he scored a fair few goals, but it'll be one that if we get linked to, I'll be able to talk to Rich Hall, our Italian expert, about more about him. But yeah, I hear he's absolutely banging them in this season, but I've not seen enough to be able to comment on. Tom says, Tom, would you say that the issue with Lacazette isn't really a lack of talent, but his age and a too expensive contract extension? We probably need to invest in a younger striker for financial reasons. I mean, arguably, Tom, the fee that you're going to get for this guy and the fee that you're going to have to pay for another club to get a young, good striker in that's better than him, it's going to cost you a significant amount anyway, even if you're able to sell Lacazette. A 1-year extension to Lacazette for the moment, I don't think is that big of a problem, especially when Arsenal got bigger issues in my mind in other areas of the pitch. So I don't mind a 1-year extension, especially when you see some of the names that we're being linked with, the likes of Dembele, the likes of well, to be honest, we haven't really been linked to too many strikers at the moment, is the honest truth. We've talked a lot about strikers and the ones that we would go for, but Arsenal haven't really been linked to too many right now. We talk about Tony and Andre Silva, and I talk about Youssef En-Nesyri from Sevilla, and we talk about Julio Jovic maybe, and these guys, but I just don't think it's going to be the right way that Arsenal are going to go into this summer are really looking at a striker. And I think Lacazette might be given a new 1 year, I hope, but you know what Arsenal are like, so it could be a bit more than that. We'll have to wait and see. So Hill says, Tom, why don't we go for some more Prem proven guys like Danny Ings? I mean, Danny Ings' his injury record would put me off immediately. If we'd have got him before his injury problem started, I would have been all over it for it, because I think it's a good player and I think he's someone that would improve Arsenal. But his injury record is just not reliable to keep him. But I agree in the sentiment of going for a player in the Premier League and looking to get more players from England into the squad. That is certainly something I'm an advocate of, but it's just very hard and expensive to get those types of players, especially because most of the really good ones are already at the much bigger clubs. I mean, how many people, if you had said to you 7-8 months ago that they're going to go for Iheanacho, how many people would have turned it down, and how many would turn that down now after seeing how well he's come on towards the second part of this season? So you never really know. Honda Boy says, what about Wout Weghorst? Not a chance in hell. I mean, the guy is, 28, 29 now, and he's got a long-term contract with Wolfsburg, and that would be a lot of money that it would cost to bring him in with no sell-on value whatsoever. And I think that we're probably going to end up moving away from a system that relies purely upon kind of a one-dimensional player that I see Wout Weghorst as. Just not a fan of the guy, personally. And I don't think he's the right one to go for. We're going to wrap things up there. We are going to be back this afternoon with a podcast at 8:30, so make sure you tune in for that. Looking forward to having a chat with Johnny and Raf and French about Arsenal and the situation we find ourselves in. Plenty more opportunities for you guys to get your questions answered by the guys on the podcast. That'll be 8:30 UK time on the channel. And of course, we'll be back tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. to give you the latest Arsenal transfer information as well. It's been a pleasure speaking to you as always. And as always, up the Arsenal.